Okay, hello everyone. My name is Apoorv Durga. I am a research analyst with Real Story Group and I cover ECM, document management, portals, digital marketing, mobile, and a few other research streams. I am based in New Delhi, India, from where I am doing this session right now. One of the attributes that we evaluate in most of our reports is what is known as cloud services. By cloud services, we mean to what extent can a particular solution get deployed in the cloud, either by you or by the vendor or a third party. Now, if you are involved with any type of enterprise content management or digital asset management initiative, you've probably considered some sort of a cloud deployment model. In fact, in our numerous advisory engagements with customers, discussions around cloud are now becoming increasingly common. So, in this session, we will explore key aspects that you need to consider while evaluating ECM or DM or DAM or other similar technologies in the cloud. Now, we'll spend about 30 minutes in this session. There's a Q&A panel on the GoToWebinar window, so you can post any questions to me using that. Or if you prefer, send me an email and I'll try to respond as soon as I can. Uh, this webinar is in partnership with Document Strategy Media, which is a great resource for not just document and content technologies, but also for other aspects related to strategy, governance, and so forth. Document Strategy Media also organizes a conference called Document Strategy Forum, which is targeted at customer communication management and ECM professionals. So let's start with a brief introduction to what we do. We are a buyer's advocate for enterprises looking to invest in content technologies. Now, what that means is that we analyze weaknesses and strengths of the tools and vendors that we cover. And then, based on those weaknesses and strengths, we publish independent research that then helps our customers sort out suitable technology choices for their specific needs. Now, besides research, we also provide advice on successful technology selection. So, we work with our customers on their initiatives for product and tool selection. In doing all this, we take our independence really seriously, and I really believe this is something that differentiates us from other analysts. I have been a system integrator myself before joining Real Story Group, and I have some idea of what independence really means. Right, the keywords here are buyer's advocate and independent, which means we don't work for vendors ever. We cover what we call as digital workplace and marketing technologies marketplace, and that includes these research areas. Across all these research areas, we provide in-depth reports as well as advisory services. We have this rather popular subway map which shows you the breadth and depth of our coverage. We cover more than 200 vendors across the research areas that I mentioned in the last slide. I would encourage you to download a high fidelity version of this chart from our site, our website. This particular subway map makes it really easy to find out which vendor has strengths in which marketplace. So, for example, if you were to look at or if you were evaluating portal tools, the green line gives you a list of key vendors to look at. So that really provides you a good starting point to create your own shortlist. Now, with these basics out of the way, let's get going then. As you consider the cloud model, there are a few specific aspects you should look at. And here's a quick checklist, and we'll obviously go through this in next few slides. Before that, there's a disclaimer. This is probably not an exhaustive list, but I would think that this is a good indication of what most customers consider or should consider. Now, much of the industry discussion around cloud usually tends to gravitate to two extremes. On the one extreme is a set of arguments that says that this is really a panacea for business and IT challenges, and on the other extreme, there are people who think that this is really a security and regulatory nightmare. We think that the truth lies somewhere in between. So while you should look to exploit these cloud based models, go in with your eyes wide open, right? So cloud has many meanings and many variations in terms of deployments and architectures. So points 1 and 2 are really about that. Basically, as a user, you need to understand different options and what is it that you want. We shall look at these and in particular also look at what hybrid cloud means in context of ECM and DAM. Remember that this is not a discussion of cloud per se, but instead we will see how cloud is particularly used in context of ECM and DAM marketplaces. Now, once you've figured out different options for your ECM or DAM to be cloud ready, there are a few more important aspects that you should consider. So, for example, when using a cloud based model, ultimately your data leaves you and goes somewhere else, right? So point number 3 is really about security implications specific to cloud. People assume cloud vendor will do all the management and administration. That's never true. So point number 4 is about that. For large and complex ECM slash DAM implementations, integration with other application is an important criteria. So that's point number 5. We will also look at a few other issues such as reporting, scalability slash reliability, content ownership issues, and compliance related aspects related to cloud models. So let us review these. The first point is really to figure out what the cloud means to you. You've probably seen this picture before. Definitions of cloud vary, and vendors use this fact to suit their offerings. So at the very outset, you will want to distinguish between what is known as infrastructure as a service (IaaS), platform as a service (PaaS), and software as a service (SaaS) versions of cloud. In fact, traditional ECM and DAM vendors will often say that they do cloud, but just remember that this can mean a variety of different things. And that could include, for example, support for simple virtualization in your environment. So that's one variation of what cloud can mean. Another variation of what cloud could mean is when vendors help you with managed offerings, managed hosting on their infrastructure or on a public cloud infrastructure such as Amazon. Finally, cloud can also refer to when a vendor provides you a multi-tenant SaaS solution from grounds up. Now, in context of ECM or DAM tools marketplace, there are different variations of how cloud is deployed. It could be public cloud, private cloud, community cloud, or a combination of one or more of these, which is essentially a hybrid cloud. So let's look at some of these deployment options in more details in context of ECM slash DAM. The first option of deployment is on premise. Now, this is technically not a cloud deployment model, but we should discuss this just to make sure that we understand the context and how cloud deployments model differ from this option, right? So this is really the default option. You buy the software and install it on your servers within your premises. So you essentially own the software as well as the infrastructure. Now you could of course outsource the management and hosting to a third party or a partner, in which case it becomes managed hosting. Now usually there are no typical cloud characteristics or advantages, not even virtualization present, unless of course you make the extra effort to set that up yourself. So this is the first deployment option, which is most common and which has been there forever, right? The next deployment option is what is known as private cloud. Now, this is just like an on premise deployment option, but with cloud aspects added onto it. So, you still manage the DAM software yourself and it lives behind some sort of an enterprise firewall. But now it runs on a cloud platform that can bring typical cloud benefits such as virtualization, elasticity, resource pooling, on demand, and so on and so forth. Now, this is similar in to on premise in the sense that it it requires the same level of skills and resources. In fact, I would go I would say that it actually requires more than cloud based more than on premise implementations. In terms it's more complex than an on premise implementation, because there are aspects of cloud, so you probably need a higher level of skills and resources than an on premise installation. So therefore you will want to examine some of the same architectural considerations, such as whether the DAM software is certified to run in your particular flavor of private cloud stack or not. Option number 3 is public cloud. Now in this option, you put your ECM or DAM setup in a public cloud service, like Rackspace, Amazon, or Azure, Microsoft Azure. So you typically use a third party owned and managed infrastructure, but the software itself is owned by you. So depending on your contract, this could be an infrastructure as a service, meaning you rent hardware, servers, etc., or a platform as a service, meaning you can rent databases, a develop environment, even programming language, and so on and so forth. Right. So for the services that you hire, or for the cloud aspects that uh, to that you take from the vendor, you would be spending operate you would be doing you would be renting them out. So instead of doing a capital expenditure or a one time expenditure, you would do an operational expenditure, meaning you would typically pay a rent every month or something like that, right? So if it's an infrastructure of or as a service, you would pay that rent for the hardware, servers, switches, etc. If it's a platform as a service, you would typically pay that rent for a database or programming language, or whatever you have rented out. Option 4 is software as a service. Now, in this approach, the vendor has built a multi-tenant SaaS solution from ground up, right? So not only just the hardware and infrastructure, but the software is also owned by that vendor, right? And you rent, in addition to software infrastructure platform, you also rent out the software or the application itself. Right, DAM vendors that take this approach include Widen and Net Exposure. In the ECM marketplace, also there are a number of vendors. So all cloud file sharing tools take this approach, and a few ECM tools such as Alfresco and Spring CM take this approach. Even Microsoft takes this approach. Right. So note that while most of the solutions didn't historically run in a public cloud, but were hosted in a vendor's in the vendor's own infrastructure, they are now offering alternative public cloud options as well. And the final option is hybrid uh, deployment option, option number 5. So hybrid installation, as the name implies, is a mixture of cloud and an on-premise model, right? So it could be a combination of any of the approaches that we have so far discussed, right? So for example, you may want to have your software hosted and maintained by a third party. However, you may not wish to do this with your files, your assets, your data, your content, and for security reasons you might want that on premise. So in a hybrid model, you can maintain physical control over your assets and data while having a hosted platform uh, on the cloud, right? So you could host, let's say, your ECM or DAM on premise, but take advantage of cloud elasticity for your asset delivery and transformation or transcoding infrastructure. Alternatively, you could do the other way around, which means you could host your DAM application in the cloud and keep your assets on premise. Now, in theory, hybrid cloud seems to be a very useful deployment mechanism, but in reality, not many vendors do it that well. Hybrid itself has multiple variations, and so make sure you really understand that well. So there are some common approaches in hybrid development, or I'm sorry, in hybrid deployments. So let's look at some of those common deployment models for hybrid deployments. uh, Approach 1 is to have more than one DAM or ECM system. So you typically have at least two DAM or ECM systems. One of them is an in-premise system accessible to your users inside your firewall, and another one is on the outside, accessible to a broader user base. So accessible to your partners, your customers, and perhaps to your employees who are not on the corporate network. Now these two systems can be totally different tools or two instances of the same tool. You use some kind of a sync technique to copy your files selectively if required, that is also possible across the two platforms or two instances of the same platform, right? So this is useful, for example, for DAM scenarios where your internal users can collaborate internally on large size broadcast files, and when they are ready, the final file is copied to be shared with the outside world, right? So essentially the key point here is that you use a sync technique to move over files or copy files between two instances of the same tool or two different tools. Some vendors, for example EMC, have acquired cloud file sharing tools to offer this kind of functionality. The acquired platform in that case is different from their traditional offering, but a sync service then synchronizes files between them. On the other hand, some vendors, for example Alfresco and Microsoft, deploy multiple instances of their own platform across different environments and then synchronize among them. Another hybrid approach is involves using a single system that employs multiple storage options. Now these are often based on access and security consideration. So in this approach, you typically use a combination of in-house storage and public cloud-based storage to selectively store files. So using this mechanism, you can keep a highly confidential set of files between within your private cloud or simply your own premise storage devices or storage array, while allowing more generic documents to reside in the public cloud. So files that are highly confidential are stored in house, whereas more generic files such as perhaps your corporate brochures or other similar documents can be stored on the public cloud. There's still another approach which is to install different modules in separate environments. Now under this approach, you can install different components of the solution on different types of cloud infrastructure. I wouldn't call this as a hybrid environment, but a lot of vendors call this a hybrid model. So you should understand this is important, right? So as an example, you could install one module, say document management, on a public cloud, and another module such as imaging in house, right? So you typically use this model when a vendor cannot equally support different components across all deployment model. So this is really a shortcoming of that vendor, but often gets sold as a feature called hybrid cloud support, which is not, which may not necessarily be true. So understand that really well. Okay, so up until now we have seen different versions and variations of what a cloud deployment could mean. Once you understand all this well and know what works for you, there are a few other considerations that you should look at and evaluate how the tools you are considering support them. Amongst these considerations, security considerations remain at the top. They are really important, right? So the biggest argument against cloud-based applications is security, right? So as a customer, you should ask, how secure is my data, both from outside malefactors as well as within the cloud service? So there are multiple considerations there, right? And the point that you need to remember is that your data will leave your premises and be held elsewhere by others, right? But it still remains your data, and you ultimately will be held responsible for that. So the most important factor, or possibly the most important factor here, is encryption. Most vendors make tall claims about encryption. Theoretically, encryption means that only you can read the content, right? So carefully check the vendor's terms and conditions to see if they reserve the right to review and monitor your content. If that is there in their terms and conditions, that they can review your content, I think then there is something wrong with the encryption, right? Also, carefully note the differences between different forms of encryption. So, an encryption can be at rest, meaning encryption while the data is stored in the cloud, or encryption can be in transit or in flight, meaning encrypting content when it is moving from one place to another. And finally, so most vendors say that they encrypt files in flight or in transit and at rest. However, not all vendors accept encrypt content or files when the file is actually at one of the endpoints. So after the file has been downloaded to your desktop, mobile or tablet devices, it may not be encrypted, right? So understand what all levels of encryption are supported by the vendor. Now, beyond encryption and access rules, you also need to access the security of the supplier's data center and network. So, look at these aspects holistically, include authentication, authorization, encryption, data center security, and physical security as well. In many cases, you will find that the security regime is an improvement over your existing environment. But this does not mean you should take it for granted. So understand these aspects well. Next consideration is to think about admin and management overhead. We understand what admin and management refers to, right? But in the case of cloud based deployment models, most people or most customers think that the service provider will automatically administer and manage, right? But that's not really true. A lot of administration and management is about creating and managing workflows, device management, user and group management, reporting, and so forth, right? And all that is something that only you can do. You understand what it means to do report, what is required of reporting, right? So you will have to have those skills and capabilities to be able to do all that. You will almost always need to manage your installation yourself. So it is important to find out if the admin capabilities provided by vendors are sufficient or not. So for example, all the are the configuration options granular enough? In our experience, we have seen that typically the admin options in case of cloud based products are not as granular as they are in the on premise or in premise product. So keep that in mind and evaluate that thoroughly. The next issue to consider would be related to integration and extensibility. Integration and extensibility can be crucial differentiators. At an enterprise level, obviously this is an important feature, right? So you might want to integrate with the desktop tools or enterprise systems such as uh, Salesforce or ECM, other ECM products, and so forth, and so on and so forth. Now, in a traditional on-premise installation, you can typically brute force the required integrations, but such customizations or extensions are not really that easy in case of cloud-based products, because that really goes against the uh, basic fabric of a cloud-based basic premise of a cloud-based service, right? So understand what all is provided by the vendor, what kind of integration options are there, what kind of connectors are there, what are the APIs, web services, etc. are there, and what is possible. Reporting and compliance is another issue. So you want to be able to monitor different quotas such as storage, bandwidth, users, etc. You also want to be able to monitor workspaces, files, folders, sharing, and so forth. So it's important to understand what kind of metrics are available. Now, in an in-premise system, you can analyze the log files and generate all sorts of reports that may not be possible in cloud-based products. So it's important to understand what type of metrics are available. How is it to create your own reports? Can you do ad hoc reporting? Can you export reports? Can you drill down progressively? Will the reporting sufficiently meet your audit and compliance requirements? So can you comply with HIPAA and SOX and and other regulations that you might need to comply with, right? Typically, these vendors provide a technical infrastructure and security controls that can help you be compliant. But that does not mean that you will automatically be compliant. So it's important to understand what is it that you would need to do and whether compliance is even possible or not. So this is an area where you should spend a lot of your evaluation bandwidth. Uh, then you need to consider issues related to scalability and reliability. Now, two of the potential benefits of running a cloud-based system stem from elasticity and redundancy. That is, you can expand your capacity quickly and you can spread your platform horizontally to reduce the chances of downtime or latency. Nevertheless, the fact that the services run in the cloud does not ensure that they are infinitely scalable or reliable. We have seen many examples, even amongst the bigger players, where services have failed outright. Right, so it's important to ask specific questions about how the vendor handles failovers and how they scale. So you should try to simulate real life scenarios by creating your specific workflows that move files from one destination to another. Check file upload performance for large files that are typical in ECM and DAM deployments, and so on. Next, you should also consider SLAs and content ownership issues. Your cloud relationships will depend on a very thorough review and negotiation of an SLA, right? So typically these vendors provide you a standard SLA, right? And you would want some ability to modify that SLA. So at the first level, understand whether it is possible or whether it is possible for you to be able to change that SLA or not. The thing is that you need to fully acknowledge that the onus of responsibility for your data is on you and not on the cloud service provider. So specific concerns that are specific to you, such as data ownership, continuity, security, and compliance, are your problems, right? So, for example, you must ensure that before you employ these services, you have the capacity to back up your data to a separate location, right? So that way you retain access to your data regardless of a potential disruption of service. So you have to make sure that these sort of things are reflected in an SLA, and if they are not there in the standard SLA, there has to be a way to modify that SLA. The final issue is related to regulatory compliance. These cloud suppliers specialize in retaining data for long periods, right? But they are not good uh, at disposing that data on demand. So for some cloud vendors, disposal or destruction means little more than terminating client access to the data, and they leave the data in place until it is eventually overwritten. So this approach to disposition is not something that your records manager are going to like. This can be a minefield for legal departments, right? So closely interrogate how this works with those prospective vendors that you are evaluating, and don't rule out the need to apply your own rules, including transferring content to local servers for ultimate disposition. Right. So that's all really I had for this session today. This checklist here again, just for reference, these are the points that we discussed in this slide today, in the session today. Uh, Again, a disclaimer again that this is not an exhaustive checklist, but I thought this was relevant to this is relevant enough for a lot of customers, for most customers. And if you start with these 8 or 9 points, I think you will be in a good shape. So if you think there are other factors that should be considered, please feel free to send that as a feedback, and we will include that in our research report if that a lot of people are asking about that, or tell us about that. I thank you again for taking time out to attend this session. As a reminder, these are the reports, these are our coverage areas, and there are links on this slide from which you can download a sample of all our research reports and see for yourself how much detailed coverage we have for the cloud and related aspects. I would welcome any feedback uh, to you regarding this or regarding any other aspect. My contact information is mentioned on this slide. Uh, Thank you and have a good day.